Om Indram Mitram Maharato Divyaha Sasuparna Gurutman. Ekam Sat Vipra Buhuda Vedantayagnim Yaman Matarish Vanamahu. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. To that one, nameless, formless, indivisible consciousness, the seers assign many a noble title. Like the eternal companion, the friend of all beings, the waters of life, the fire of yoga, the incomparable air of heights, the devourer of death, the carrier of consciousness, and the one who shines forth the light. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect and free of all taint. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshovahai. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. So welcome everyone. So I got them to this new location. It might not be so apparent to the live streaming audience, but we are now just a few hundred yards away from where we were broadcasting to you some weeks ago, before our visit to the mainland and our retreat up the Columbia River Gorge, where we spoke on subjects such as these, dharmic subjects about non-duality and so forth. And now we're in a new location, a little smaller, and if your hearing is very acute, and you probably don't hear as much echo, because we were in a very echoey room before, and now we've trimmed it down, as is our wont to do when times call for it, and we're gathering here together, our Hawaii Sangha on the Big Island, to bring you a series of, I think, 3 classes on, 3 or 4, is it? 3 classes on non-duality in Tibetan Buddhism and Vedanta. So we're taking up the 2 wings of the bird in these wonderful darshanas of India and Tibet, because Tibet got the transmission of Indian yoga and Buddhism from about 700 AD, actually, and came down through a line of succession. A Tibetan man himself, Marpa, took a trip over the Himalayas, which at that time was very dangerous. We know even when Dalai Lama did it to escape Tibet, it was very dangerous to make that trek. So back then, even more so, and he was there in India to visit these yogis, these Buddhist yogis named Naropa and Tilopa, and learning the wonderful teachings from them. Then he brought it back to Tibet and gave it on to his first successor, his first student, named Milarepa. One cloth, Milarepa. All he had was one cloth to his name, and lived in a cave, and if he saw you on the street or in the mountain path, he'd sing a song at you right away. He wouldn't even talk to you, he'd just look at you and sing a song. And sometimes it offended people, we hear, because he just sang what he saw. And some people might not have been in the best of shape, spiritually speaking. The yogis can see things as they are, and they're well known for being rather frank and even blunt about it, in order for students to refine themselves, or to even become aware that there's a level of their consciousness that needs refining. If you're talking about ultimate consciousness, which we will be doing in this next 3 classes, with a capital C, we like to say, then that consciousness doesn't need anything. That consciousness is in and around and through everything. Sri Ramakrishna says, like sweetness in sugarcane juice. It just permeates it all. But yet it's not a thing or a name or a form. It's not caught in time. It's not contained in space. It's not subject to cause and effect, or what we like to refer to as karma, which the world is suffering all the time. So it transcends all of these things. In fact, those 5 things are the definition for Maya, according to Swami Vivekananda. Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. Time, space, name, form, time, space, and causality. So Brahman transcends all that, and that's that pure consciousness which I was just chanting about, and which either shuts you up, as the case may be when it's revealed unto you in some moment of grace or deep concentration called samadhi or nirvana in these 2 traditions. Or it, in other cases, causes you to bubble a bit. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that. He said, my glass is just getting filled all the time, so you pour water into it, it bubbles. But when it gets full, then he goes into samadhi, then there's no sound coming from him anymore. He just shuts up and revels in that sweetness of bliss, of non-dual Brahman, or nirvana, or satori, or samadhi, called in different names in various traditions. So that is the subject for the next 3 classes, and we will turn our minds and our eyes to and ears to those 2 traditions, Tibetan Buddhism and Vedanta. I'm feeling qualified to be able to express it to you because I've taken initiation into both those paths. I hold sacred fellowship into both of those traditions via Karmapa and also via my teacher Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj. So that was brought about upon me after I'd found Vedanta already, and then our founder Lexiksen said Tibetan Buddhism would be a very good thing to become aware of. And of course, for most of us in the 70s and 80s, it was becoming to be very interesting. And people didn't take to Tibetan Buddhism because of the language barrier, but you could say the same thing about Vedanta and its Sanskrit. Some people get put off by Sanskrit terms and having to learn new language and so forth. Yet they say if you go to Spain, you'll have a good time, but you'll have a better time if you learn Spanish first. So when you go to the land of spirituality, inside of yourself, which is your kingdoms of heaven within you, or is that very land, and find out that it's gradated. There are many levels, or lokas, or akashas, or heavens, bardos. Tibetan Buddhism would use the word. Pure lands, 10 pure lands in that school, where you could visit if you had access to it. So you'll need to have permission. It's essentially permission by your own self to see your own self, is how non-dualists would have to phrase it, because it's granting admission to that is a matter of your own self-awareness. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are dakinis and sakinis and harukas and various powers, both benign and wrathful. And you see this in the tankas of Tibetan Buddhism and so forth, the Buddha fields and so forth. Some of these beings are very wrathful and they test you. And others are very benign and they help you. Sometimes the wrathful ones help you more because you face them off and gain victory in that particular challenge. But non-duality, you'd have to say all these deities exist within consciousness, and that consciousness is your true nature. So this is one way of making sense out of deities. Some people in non-duality are not attracted to God with form. And in that case, then they don't make the best teachers for people who still need to work their way through these levels or kingdoms of heaven within and find the light of Brahman, whether it be at the time of meditation or the time of practice or the time of death. But Tibetan Buddhism has very powerful teachings on how to reach the Buddha light at the time of your death. It is a very good time to see your true nature, your Buddha nature, when you're passing from the body. That's actually a quote from one of my Tibetan teachers, Janggang Kantru Rinpoche, who accompanied the Karmapa to Maui when I got my initiation into that tradition in the 1970s. So, of course, they all say that it's a much better time to realize yourself before you die. How about that? So this puts the ball in our court, as it were, to expand our consciousness, that is our mind's consciousness, because consciousness with a capital C doesn't expand and contract. That's one of the things we were a little bit taken aback with, or we got sideswiped by some of the early teachers coming from India in the 60s and so forth, because they were talking about expanding your consciousness, but nobody was giving you at that time the teaching of non-duality, which said that consciousness doesn't move. Consciousness doesn't have to move because it's all-pervasive. And it's one of the teachings of the 5 elements, actually. If you look at ether, then you can move an object, but you displace air, but you don't displace ether. The same ether stays wherever, whatever object is in its place, which used to give Einstein and other great scientists who studied physical space and physics new insight into maybe another dimension. So ether is a good representative or metaphor for consciousness. It doesn't equal it, of course, because it is a physical element. But consciousness too, undisplaceable and cannot be moved. It's immovable. Like sometimes they even call it the immovable mover, because it's permeating everything, yet by the power that it provides through prana and so forth, moves everything without moving itself. So these are teachings that we have to come to grips with when we take on a tradition like Tibetan Buddhism, because they're very keen upon deities, harukas and dakinis and sakinis. You might call them spirit helpers in another way, but it must be said from the non-dual standpoint, because Tibetan also has its great seal. That's called the Maha Mudra, and that's probably its most precious gift, at least or assuredly on the non-dual level, that the Maha Mudra will look at maybe either after the break or next week, I want to show you that side by side with some other teachings that are correlative in Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. So, what I'm saying here, maybe in this preamble, as we get to the actual meat of the class, is that you could, in the Mahamudra or Tibetan Buddhism, they describe your consciousness as empty, and of course this is also a kind of a blow to our consciousness, because emptiness doesn't sound like any fun to anyone, and we have different connotations that we apply to that word. But at the same time that it's empty, it's called luminous. So the Mahamudra's perspective is that everything comes from the mind, and the stamp on it is that it's both empty and luminous. So if you were to study a great tradition like that and just focus on the emptiness and leave the luminosity out, then you would be blindsided. You'd have only half the picture. It would be like in Vedanta concentrating only on neti neti and forgetting iti iti. Neti neti means not this, not this. So you're taking everything away from the quotient so you can get to this so-called emptiness. But when you get to that emptiness, Vedanta would say it's iti iti, you'll find out that it's actually fullness, that thou art that, or any of these great sayings that Advaita Vedanta comes up with for you. Tat tvamasi, that thou art. Or in say Tantra, it would be like saying deities. On one side you'd have the tendency to deify everything. Every form has to be deified in Tantra. It has to be seen as an emanation of the divine. So that's where, when you get Buddhism and Tantra together, you have this very wonderful combination. You might even call it a sort of overlapping. See, and when you bring those two together, then you have a very powerful teaching for people to. It's like some hybrids work and others don't. See, we've seen that before, even with plants. But in this case, the hybrid of Buddhism and Tantra comes together very beautiful in Tibetan Buddhism, and it works so well. It's one of these hybrids that attracts people, and that's partially because you have this emptiness of form, but you also have this radiance, that everything is an emanation of what we would call in Vedanta Brahman. It's all an emanation of Brahman. So you wouldn't want to transgress any non-dual laws by saying Brahman is therefore the couch, or Brahman is therefore the chair, or Brahman is the tree. It's not that. You have to avoid that kind of thinking, because Brahman cannot be an object, cannot be a form, it cannot be named, and all these things. So how can you say Brahman is the tree? You're giving it a name and you're giving it a form, so that's not allowable. So you have to find philosophical ways to work around these conundrums, these possible conundrums. And Tibetan Buddhism does that in a very wonderful way. We'll see that as we look at some of the teachings. Before I launch into them proper, I want to say too that I'm going to be emphasizing something a little bit different than most non-dual teachers would want to concentrate on, and that's the fact that non-duality needs practice. And you could probably say that pertains mostly to this world. I mean, if you weren't in a physical body, with a line of ancestors behind you and karma and other various things and factors playing upon your life, then maybe it wouldn't be true. But in this case, to maintain non-duality, that is the awareness of it, you have to practice. And that's another conundrum, because most non-dualists would say the self is already pure and perfect, you don't have to practice. So here's a rub for you, if you want one, want to consider one, is that some people will then maybe be assuming that they're perfect before they're perfect, before they've realized their innate perfection. like, I could put it very simply by saying, I said that to a Swami once. They said, well, then I'm Atman. This is a pure and perfect Atman. And he said, no, Babaji, you're not Atman until you realize you're Atman. So there are some safeguards around the philosophy, and also to test you to make sure that you don't assume too much too soon. Because you've seen people fall off non-dual ladders, rungs of ladders, and end up in problematic situations, karmas, and transgressing these non-dual laws. So I'm going to be emphasizing the fact that both Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta prescribe practice. Now, if you want to put it in terms of, say, somebody like Shankara, who is known as, he and his line are the fathers of modern non-dual Advaita Vedanta, it's called. And that was like 500 AD through 700 AD, about the time when Tibet was getting some of its Marpa was crossing the mountains and coming back. About that time was when Advaita Vedanta was having a reflourishing of its school of Advaita Vedanta through Gaudapada, Govindapada, and Shankara. These three were disciples and gurus of one another. I'm saying that interchangeably because in other lifetimes they had been gurus of Shankara was Govindapada's disciple, but in another lifetime it had been different. Father of Yoga had been actually an incarnation. Govindapada had been an incarnation of the Father of Yoga in 140 AD. So Father of Yoga is coming back in the Vedantic context in 600 or so, 700 AD. And that's why Shankara was able to comment on the Yoga Sutras so beautifully. If you look into that wonderful commentary of Shankara's rendering of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, then you can make this connection that these beings were really just one being coming again and again as each other's gurus and each other's disciples. It's a lineage. So that's a very interesting fact to put together historically in the time frame of what we're talking about. So if you look at somebody like Shankara, what you're seeing there is someone who declared all is Atman, and I have realized that, but they said, well then why do you still practice? And why do you still offer flowers on your guru's slippers? And why do you do these various things? And he said, because I want to keep the mirror of my mind wiped clean so I can see Brahman at all times. So you get a response like this from extremely young, 20-year-old realized soul. I mean, he was illumined, as far as the scriptures of India were concerned. He knew them all by the time he was 10. That's a lot of scripture. So he had come back with it from another lifetime, and he just called it forward again. And he found his guru, left home at 12, and found Govindapada in a cave, and took rocks away because the cave had fallen in, and went in and found his guru almost dead, revived him, got some teachings from him. And by the time he was in his teaching gray beards, by the time he was 16 and 18. So he's telling you then that you have to keep your mind, the mirror of your mind, wiped clean. So that should really tell you two things. Number one, the mind is not the Atman. We hear all the time the body's not the Atman. That should be obvious to everyone. With any intelligence, that would be an obvious thing. But people do then shift to a mental perspective which is intellectual and philosophical. And that is after they get beyond the psychological. Yoga really deals more with the psychological, and in a good way. And so, I mean, that's basically what this chart here is telling you. You can see up the middle is the most essential part of that, I think, because otherwise you just get a listing of a lot of the various darshanas there. But you can see up the middle, Samkhya is the body. He's the yogi, the mountain yogi is there sitting there with his mudra, you see, of perfection, which is, you know, both Hindu and Buddhist again. So he's there, and so this is an idea from Swami Vivekananda that Samkhya Yoga, the 24 cosmic principles and all of that, which influenced all the philosophies of India after Kapila composed it, did his homework, is the body of the whole thing. So you've got what? The 5 elements, you've got the 5 senses, you've got then the subtle senses in dream tonight, and subtle elements in dream tonight, because this is very important, because so you'll know that when you go into dream, you are going to the kingdoms of heaven. They're not up there. So when you shift into dream tonight, that's where you're going. If you take your consciousness with you, you will see your ancestors, you'll see the angels, you'll see the celestials. All of this is inside of your consciousness at the next level, or the next akasha, or the next bardo, or the next loka. There are words for this that we don't have in English. So we're rather up a creek without a paddle when we try and explain this to our children, or to anyone else for that matter, or understand it ourselves, because we just don't, in our 200 or so year old culture, we just don't have any of this. So we're borrowing. We're hopefully borrowing like mad, borrowing as much as we can to understand as much as we can in this so-called free country, because at least we do have certain freedoms which allow us to pursue religion and enlightenment without a lot of interference, like that was in Jesus' time, for instance. So Samkhya, the body, means you've got these basically 24 tattvas, they're called. Tattvas are principles. And consciousness shifts along principles. So if you come out of deep sleep tonight, you'll take on the principles. You'll take on subtle senses, and then you'll take on subtle elements. And you'll be flying in air, and you'll be drinking water, and you'll be having a feast with your ancestors, or seeing your father, or your grandfather, or whatever. So your consciousness is actually coming down from a non-dual state into the dream state, getting ready to take form. Then it will take form in the dream state. And the dream state is as varied as you want, as many different lokas and worlds as possible you can see, all a part of the collective consciousness in its dream phase. Dreaming is really what this is all about, according to the Advaita Vedantas. The A stands for waking, the U stands for dreaming, and the M stands for deep sleep. What else are we going to conclude? That the word Om, that was at the beginning, that was with God and which was God, is actually our own consciousness in 3 different levels. This is why you hear the 3 worlds all the time. Oh, may peace be to the 3 worlds, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. This is why they say this. So you can bring peace to those inner, to your own self really, to your own consciousness. So your own consciousness is vast. It's infinite. You hear this all the time, but until you hear the philosophy outline it for you, you don't really know. And then you can account for it. So Samkhya is the body, and then the next step up is yoga, the energy, you see, right there at the next chakras. And so yoga has to do, as I was saying, with that psychology that awakens you to your powers, the various powers inside of you. That's the first thing the yogis will want you to do, is seize the prana. That is, if you don't walk up to them already in control of the prana, that is, your senses are controlled, your mind is controlled, and they see that this is the case, and they'll say, okay, we'll leave you alone, go forward. But if you're coming to them in a state that's just not so fine and fettle, your senses aren't under control, and you're having problems, emotional, psychological, and otherwise, because Father of Yoga outlined 9 of those different impediments, and 2 of them were physical, and 3 of them were mental, and 1 intellectual, philosophical, and the other 2 others are spiritual. So there are 9 impediments there in people. So if they see you have those, they'll say, well, then you need to get a hold of your prana. So let's have you breathe. See? Both Buddhism and Hinduism, which, by the way, are the same thing. Vivekananda said there's no difference between Buddhism and Vedanta. It's all one mother country, one mother religion. And it, of course, has its various aspects. And, of course, when you bring Tibet into it, it gets even a little bit more far-flung, because you've got a country that's on the border of India, across the Himalayas, and received this teaching. And when it came over the borders, then it had to develop. And as it developed over, what, now 1,400 years or so, and we have the Dalai Lama with us, the 14th, I think it's his 14th rebirth or something, then you've got a long-standing relationship with Indian Dharma that you've taken and blended with Bon religion, because Bon religion was there when when Milarepa got the transmission from Marpa. The Bon religion was a black magic and white magic, and a lot of casting spells. In fact, Milarepa himself was guilty of casting a spell to kill his uncle, who was an evil person and who was causing harm to his mother. So with the Bon religion, he cast a spell that destroyed his uncle. So when Marpa met him, oh, you can't get enlightenment, you have this horrible karma. Oh, really? Yeah, so how do I get rid of it? Build me a house. So Milarepa built a house, see, and then Marpa came to look at it. Tear it down, do it again. It's not right. 7 times that happened. Milarepa built the house 7 times, and in that effort of everything that it took to construct and tear down the house and all the experiences that went with it, he expunged his karma for killing. So when you look at Tibet then, you see that this is a country that is very deep into the tradition, and by the time it reached our land, you see, and it came to America and so forth, it was already bringing with us a fully matured system of bardos, these worlds inside of you, and how the soul passes out of the body and how it gets back into the body. Quite a bit of it was based on the early Indian Samkhya, because you had to have places to go in order for your consciousness to take a form. You might say space had to be there first, and time had to be in operation before name and form could actually manifest themselves, you see. So in that rendering then, you've got Samkhya as the body and then yoga is the energy. So you want to get a hold of this energy and become aware of all of these powers within you and then coalesce them. The yogis want you to actually take the powers that you get from yoga and concentrate them in the heart. See? So if you concentrate them in the heart, then you can open that center, that heart chakra. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, oh, what is this? What is this? The man says, oh, this is beautiful. He's looking inside and he's seeing the opening of his own consciousness. He's granted to himself his own prayer of seeing his true nature. He's acquainting himself with his own self. Tantra puts it, you're the darling of your own worship. See? You're the darling of your own worship. So I don't have to tell you, this young man sitting here, all his emails comes to me at the bottom. It says, we are the ones we have been waiting for. That's like his slogan at the bottom of his emails. So that's like saying you are the darling of your own worship, you see. So with Samkhya and yoga together, then here at the heart you see Tantra, which is this love affair that the human soul has with God, with form. See, here we're studying Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta in the light of non-duality. So I told you I'm going to start you off with some practice, but how practice is necessary. So when you get to practice of devotion, that's where Tantra excels. It wants to see God in everything, so if it doesn't, then it starts to do rituals. Now, Tantra was not a formal Indian darshan like yoga was. Yoga, very vast, probably the vastest philosophical system I've ever studied and tried to teach is yoga. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, amazingly complex and wonderful in all of its ramifications. However, Tantra, nobody ever came along like Patanjali did with yoga and said, I think I'll take all of Tantra and put it into one path. It's just not possible. There's just too many rituals and too many rites and too much time had passed. You can go all the way back to the ancient valleys they're excavating right now. You see Mohenjo-daro and all those valleys that they're excavating and find these statues of Shiva and Shakti that were being excavated now and carbon dated to be thousands of years old. Cradle of civilization kind of thing along the Indus River Valley, you see. And so Tantra has been that ancient and that old. And of course, when we talk about India or any world, it's always cycling. That's one of the teachings Lord Buddha gave us, was everything cycles. Like a river, everything returns. He just happened to be one of the souls that extracted himself from that river, not only physically when he got out of the river and sat on the banks, but as a soul when he got out of the river of time and saw that it arced. If you can see the arcing of time, and if you're out of it, you can see that it's actually circling and coming around behind you. It's not a flat line like Western science thinks it is, and Western psychology assumes it is. It's always a cycle. So there's no beginning and middle and end to anything, Krishna tells Arjuna in the Gita. You and I have been on this battlefield again and again, doing this same song, the Gita, again and again, for cycles after cycles. You might ask why, and that gets into a whole other topic, but it's probably to cull some certain souls out of the process, because India is the only religion, series of darshanas, that proposes to get you out of the transmigratory cycle. The other religions don't concentrate on that. So it's something to consider, and why maybe some people keep at a distance from Vedanta and Buddhism. Buddhism, I think out of all the 7 major religions, has got maybe 5th in the amount of population that are devotees of it, because it's very serious about transmigration, suffering, ignorance, and getting out of that wheel. And the Four Noble Truths of Buddha are based on that. There is suffering, there's a cause for it, and there's a way out. And here I'll tell you what it is. Eightfold Path it's called. Ashtanga Marga. Well, 550 BC from Ashtanga Marga to 140 BC, with Patanjali's 8-limb system, they were both Ashta systems. And Ashtanga Yoga, as it's sometimes called. So you see that everybody was really following Lord Buddha's lead. But Lord Buddha's lead was he was following the ancient Sankhya, because he took 2 Sankhya teachers before he went into the forest and became an ascetic. And then he, of course, over time got nirvana under the bo tree by sitting for so many days, and came up with this whole new system called the Ashtanga Marga, and gave it as a gift to India. Now, in the time we're in now, we have Swami Vivekananda jumping the ocean and giving all of this to us. Whether we're worthy of it or not remains to be seen. But this is the first time Indian Dharma has crossed the ocean and come to everyone. We're sitting here in the midst of it right now. And we need to take ourselves to task and be very serious about it and realize it to as great an extent as we possibly can according to our own capacities today. So if you talk about Tantra, then you're talking about a path that proceeds through love. They want to deify everything. So you can't say that the tree is God, you can't say that the couch is God, but if I worship the tree, then I'll see Atman in it. I'll see God in it. So you might, that's sort of one of the interesting facets about Indian Dharma, and sort of one of the cliches. So you see a yogi sitting in front of a flower that's blooming, see? And this is supposed to have some sort of significance, like, oh, nature or something. It's not that at all. It's that he's seeing the divine in action. See? But yet the divine is inactive. They also call it the inactive actor. The immovable mover, the inactive actor, the unseen seer, the unstruck sound, Om. These are all appellations for Brahman, for the ultimate formless reality. So we have to have a way to put it into word. And Tantra thinks we should have a way to worship it. Because if we're seeing the couch just as something to sit on for our own pleasure and to own, you see, when you can't really own anything, Jesus said, and we're seeing land, property, and trees and everything the same way, then there's a misorientation happening in us. We've transgressed the laws of nature, trying to own something and trying to take things from others. I mean, remember the first 5 kleshas of yoga. You've got ignorance, egotism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. And the first yamas, 5 yamas of yoga are ahimsa, nonviolence, satya, truthfulness, and what's the third? Asteya, not coveting anything. And what's the 5th? Not giving anything to anyone and not taking anything. Why? Oh, because it'll bind them? Well, that's on the physical level. Father of Yoga said the reason you don't give and take things away is because you're engaging people in commerce. And if they engage in commerce, they won't remember their past lifetimes. And if they don't remember their past lifetimes, then they've forgotten their true nature. They can't trace themselves back to the Atman, which they are. They've got a whole line of ancestors and a whole bunch of lifetimes in the way of that because they've been engaged in commerce for so many lifetimes. So when you have a system like Samkhya that wants you to look at all the tattvas, inside of the tattvas, air, earth, fire, water, and ether, is where you died last lifetime. This connects to Tibetan Buddhism because at the time of death, it wants you to see Buddha nature as the 5 elements are being taken away from you. See? It's a beautiful teaching. So first you're dying, you see, so-called dying. And you're going in and out of the body, you see. So first thing that happens is, you know, your mouth dries up. So you're having to let go of water. So the Tibetan Rinpoche will stand over you and say, don't worry about that, just forbear it. You're thirsty, so what? Now the next thing is your eyes burn, so you're giving up fire. See this? And the next thing, you can't breathe. You're short of breath. You're giving up air. See? And so forth and so on. So all the 5 elements have you have your attachment to them, and you've probably had it for many lifetimes. But the difference between you and the yogis, or the realized souls, is that they have given up the body consciously for so long. Like 14 Dalai Lamas or something. You see, or Hindu sages that have been born many times, you see, like Krishna and so forth. He said to Arjuna on the battlefield, I've had many lifetimes and I know them all. But Arjuna, you've had many lifetimes, but you don't know any of them yet. And that's because he's been a warrior engaged in his worldly activity for every one of those lifetimes. So nobody ever came up to him and said, you've lived before. And in fact, living and dying is nonsense. You're eternal. There's no such thing as birth, life, and death. It's all a dream in your head. So nobody ever came up to him and told him that. So now he's having this great soul standing in front of him on the battlefield between 2 armies, just before the main pitch of it all, and he's having this great soul tell him, in this most dire of situations, the truth of eternal life. The same way Christ did between the Romans and the Pharisees in that battlefield with his 12 apostles. So all of this is very connected. You have Tantra loving every object, so deifying it. It's a manifestation of Brahman, but I can't call it Brahman. So this is something people are not clear about philosophically. I'll go hug the tree, you see, or something. I'm a tree hugger. Well, let it go. My teacher used to say, everybody's worried about losing paradise. See? Let it be lost. It all came out of you. You can get it again. I'll get another one. See? So attachment, I mean, that's one of those yogic problems, is attachment and aversion. Attachment, aversion, attachment, aversion. It's one of the most binding of all dualities that the Indian seers try and tell you about. And you should rather be detached and not unaverse. Krishna says in the Gita, be content with anything. If lava flows down the mountain and takes away your home, is what we're hundreds of homes being burnt right now, you have to somehow be content with it. Easy for me to say, yeah, maybe right now, but I just met somebody at the health food store just a couple days ago who lost their home, and he said it was the greatest experience of his life. Said it put him through all sorts of horrible things, and then he came out the other side with a grace that he'd never had before. So what about that? So if you lose your attachment to things, then you probably will start to look at them differently. Say, well, maybe these are objects, manifestations of Brahman. And so my point is, Tantra has that heart to everything. So this great yogi here is a complex of all four of these darshanas. And this one at the brain is called Vedanta. And Vedanta is the mind. So this was Vivekananda's idea here. We can say this. This great immortal frame of Indian philosophy operates efficiently on four great powerhouses. Samkhya, its body, Yoga, its divine energy, Tantra, its loving heart, and Vedanta, its universal mind. That's a paraphrase of mine by reading Swami Vivekananda's idea on this. So look all around this great mountain yoga. You'll see all these paths that have been given. Shaktism, worship of Divine Mother. Vaishnavism, worship of Vishnu or Krishna. The Vaishnavas love Krishna and Ram. Shaivism. Buddhism. There's Buddhism. Buddhism would hold within its fold Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and we'll be talking about Vajrayana mostly today when we look at some of the Tibetan teachings. That's the diamond vehicle that Tibet contributed to Buddhism. And we know Zen was eventually another contribution, all the way to Japan, 64 generations after Zen got India's teachings, or Japan got India's teachings, and Zen came out of it. So this is how powerful this fourfold powerhouse is, that it would go around the world completely. And in our generations, that is, these recent generations since 1893, brought it fully around the world, came together with Swami Vivekananda and one of the Zen Roshis in New York who had come also. It was a meeting of all these 64 generations right here in America. So that's why Vivekananda used to say to us, you know, the sun may rise in India, but it sets in America. So here we need to be ready for that glorious sunset, you know, see, and take this teaching of fourfold if you want. And so Buddhism holds everything within it. And then you've got Ganapatya. If you like the elephant-headed god, you like to probably just cozy right in there with the followers and devotees of Ganesha. Om Jaya Ganapati Ganesha Jaya Om. Omkara Prabhu Sharanam Sharanam. I take refuge, Sharanam, in Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, who is the radiant sun that lights the face of the Divine Mother. So a very powerful connection between Ganapatya and Shaktism. Mother Durga has, you know, basically Ganesha serves Divine Mother. He's there, and Mother Durga's images is Ganesha's there, and Kartikeya is on the other side. It's like her two sons. So Ganapatya, many, many millions of followers of this interesting elephant-headed god, and beautiful stories about how he got his elephant head too. Jainism. At the time of Lord Buddha, the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism was just passing, Mahavir. 24 generations before Lord Buddha was Jainism. If you can think about that, the most nonviolent religion of the world is that ancient. And it probably influenced India so much, and it definitely influenced Buddhism, because we know that Buddhism spread everywhere and turned kings into vegetarians and stopped animal sacrifice. So when Buddhism got afoot, which it did, that's how it spread. It didn't spread by a sword or by violence. It's just spread by mendicants walking and talking about Buddha Dharma. That was the most marvelous of all religions, right out of Mother India, is that it didn't use any violence or any proselytization to spread itself. It just went out and said the truth that Buddha said to everyone. And along the way, it developed several paths. Hinayana was Indian Buddhism, then Mahayana, the greater vehicle they call it, because it had to expand to do this task, and then finally Vajrayana in Tibet. And all of that we'll look at. Solarism is the worship of the sun. Goes way back, probably even before Egypt was worshiping the sun. And Sikhism too. Last month I had a class in Portland about the sun god. And we started studying the Akshi Upanishad. If you can look back on that. So I made a chart of the sun god and all the meanings of that, so if we don't just think that it's a bunch of people getting together and bowing to the sun up in the sky, they might as well bow several billion times because there's that many suns up there. All those stars you're seeing. So it's not the physical sun that they're worshiping when we talk about Taoism. They're worshiping the great idea, the great sun god, out of whom came all these great thoughts which turned into suns. So you trace the sun back just like you would trace anything divine back to its source. So when you take a tree or a moon or a sun or anything, you trace it back to its source, and then you start to get the essence of the thing. And you meditate on that essence, and that gives you bliss. So that's why they're so blissful all the time. So whether you're doing it the Tantric way, the Yogic way, or the Vedantic way, which happens to be cut a little higher, let's say. See, Tantra's cutting there, and Vedanta starts to cut the head off, you see. Then Advaita Vedanta, there's nothing to cut off anymore. It's all been cut away. No excess anymore. It's all empty, as Tibetan Buddhists describe it. But that emptiness is luminous. See, it's got the stamp of luminosity on it, just like the couch does, and just like the tree does. It's got Buddha nature in it. Not in its material particles. That was brought together by our mind and our senses. We did that. We congealed them. Because tonight we'll take the couch and take it into dream particles, won't we? We do that. Nobody else does that for us. In fact, you should turn this process around, that the whole world got manifested by you from dream particles. And you brought it here and you congealed them into a solid object, and you got 5 senses to enjoy them. And then here you are, see. But your ancestors are still back there in the dream particles. And the celestials are before them. And before them are the gods and goddesses. And before them are the seers and saints. And before them is the Trinity. You see at the top here, you can read this. The eternal religion of the rishis has been in existence from time out of mind. A nice phrase. This is Sri Ramakrishna speaking. The Sanatana Dharma, which means the eternal religion, contains all forms of worship. Worship of God with form, and worship of the impersonal deity as well. It contains all paths, the paths of knowledge, the path of devotion, and so on. Other forms of religion, the modern cults will remain only for a few days and then disappear. The Sanatana Dharma declared by the rishis will alone endure. That's because it has this non-dual strand running through everything, just like that couch and its mattress on it has a weave of thread running through everything. You don't see the thread when you look at the mattress, you see, or the pillow. You see the pillow. So you don't see this non-dual essence in everything when you look at objects. And when you try and look at objects with an electron microscope, you'll see emptiness. Basically is what you're saying, is emptiness. Constant change and flux. And so who solidified it? Who did that? Thousands and thousands of minds in their dream process did that. And they came out from deep sleep to dreaming to waking and brought it all with them. And God had nothing to do with this whatsoever. And neither did the devil, by the way, in case you're trying to look for a scapegoat. God and devil don't exist. Only the great self exists, and that great self can splinter itself into billions of souls by the power of Mahamaya, by its own power. Krishna says that in the Gita. Maya is in Brahman like poison is in the snake, Sri Ramakrishna said. The snake doesn't die from it, but you may die if you get bit by it. So you be very careful of this world of name and form and time and space. that has come out of you as your own projection. That's called sankalpa. We don't have a word like that in English. Mental projection, which produces objects from thoughts. It's just not in our thinking. We can't believe it because with our tactile senses we don't see it happening. But we haven't discovered our dream state yet, out of which all of these things came. We'd have to study the Samkhya to know that. Kapila put it down for us in 24 different steps, in 5s. Contemplication process is called. So up there at the brain, you see, so down here is Advaita underlined. And you can see some 35 paths of Sanatana Dharma. Oh, really, Babaji? There's a lot more than that now, I've found. I probably did this chart about 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I could fill this out a lot more. But as I was studying the different paths of India, I mean, not the darshanas, like the religions and so forth, the lineages, but the actual paths that are contained philosophically in them, I had found 35 at the time. And there's like Shunyatavada right there. That's the path of those who thinks everything's empty. See, Vada means path. We looked at everything, we saw it was empty, so it doesn't exist to its illusion. So they became really attached to the fact that the world was an illusion. But somewhere along the way, the Tibetan Buddhists came along and said, yes, it is illusory, but it's stamped with radiance. See, now we're getting somewhere, you see. Now I'm not left high and dry philosophically. Now Tantra makes sense to me, how to love things. And energy makes sense to me. You know, that yoga, it's much deeper energy than kinetic or something. You see, like lightning bolts in the sky and so forth, or energy from a physical sun. It's much deeper than that. You see, and so I better look back here at the very foundation, root chakra of things. There you see a little foursquare there. In school we always played foursquare, you see, so you've got this cross drawn on the ground and each of the kids get in the four squares and you hit the ball from square to square, you see. So you do four squares, you see. Then you'd eliminate the guy if they couldn't hit the ball back or if it hit a line or something. See, then you'd be eliminated, the next person would come in, next child. And so we get these spins on the balls, you see. They go to hit them back and the ball would go this way. And we were having a lot of fun with foursquare. So here's a little foursquare of yoga for you. Karma, Bhakti, Jnanam, and Raja. And this Patanjali Yoga 8-limb, that's Raja. That was the 140 BC version that we saw, talked about, which was 600 years or so after Buddha did his Ashtanga, 8-limbed path. Ashtanga Marga, it was called. Vada Marga, pretty much the same thing. So there you see the Tower of Non-Dual Truth down the right-hand side. And then the cosmic mind, then unmanifested prakriti at the throat, then manifested prakriti at the heart. So this is another way of saying these different levels of tattvas. So Samkhya would break into manifested prakriti, and that means everything we can see here, taste, touch, hear, and smell is manifested prakriti. And that's what we think exists. And we can't find it out in space, anything like it yet. So it's just only here. So that kind of supplies us with a conundrum. See, why only here? Why only us? And but we don't know that, like Sri Krishna was telling Arjuna in the battlefield, that I have two natures, Arjuna. My manifested nature, which is 5 elements in the threefold mind. Back then it was an 8-fold thing. And I also have my unmanifested prakriti, which would be roughly like your deep sleep state, where all the seeds to everything are. So he's making the connection at a fairly early time in India for Arjuna to say that everything with form came out of formlessness. But it didn't come out of formless Brahman, because Brahman doesn't produce things. So here's where we get the essence of the Advaita Vedanta starting to come through. Brahman does not produce things. It's not a creator. It doesn't destroy. It doesn't even sustain. The Trinity does all that. See? Brahman is transcendent, yet all-pervasive. You've got these beautiful stotrams written in India about it. So there's where you begin to find yourself on the cusp of something that's making the distinction that Samkhya is trying to tell you about and what Vedanta is insisting is true. See? The tattvas are insentient. Air, earth, fire, water, and ether. All the way to mind and intellect, insentient. They don't shine with a light of their own. That light comes from this non-dual tower of truth called consciousness, or Brahman, or Chaitanya. There are different words for it in different traditions. And so out of that comes this relationship. Om Adihi Sa Samyoga Nimitta Hetu. Paras, Drikala, Dakalo, Dri, Pidristaha. Tam, Vishvarupam, Bhavamutta, Bhavabhuta Midyam. Devam Swachitastam Upasya Purvam. So the beautiful chant in Sanskrit says, know that that one primal being is the author of the relationship between spirit and matter, between soul and nature. That one indivisible being brings them together. So here's nature, and here's that ultimate reality called spirit. See, so it's like God and Mammon, or Purusha and Prakriti, or Shiva and Shakti, Brahman and Maya. There's these different ways in which the different traditions have called it. And here you find out, like in nowhere else in philosophy, that Prakriti is divided twofold. There's a manifested side of it, and then there's an unmanifested side of it. So here is where we get to these essential truths of Vedanta, which we'll look at next. But as I'm saying this right now, I can finish it up by saying that from the infinite, the finite has come. And, so all of this is infinite, right? But it's finite in its consistency. That is, it passes, it changes, it decays. It's born again. But it's coming out of an unmanifested Prakriti that's extremely fine, the finer stuff of nature. So nature has a finer stuff, and that's all contained in your mind is these tattvas. You see, air, earth, fire, water, and ether in your mind are different than air, earth, fire, water, and ether out here. So this is how you would trace the elements back to your own authorship. They came out of me. They didn't come out of God. So this is where God stays detached, free, unbound, uninvolved. And we don't, as non-dualists, drag it. You're not going to say him or her, because it's beyond gender too. We don't drag it or that into this mess called nature, where Lord Buddha said, birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death take place in constant rounds called samsara, and tend to hypnotize the soul and bind it to the world. The senses bind to the world. So, senses to their objects. Objects, why? Because of pleasure. Why? Because of desire. Why is the whole thing there? Because of my own mind's desire to project it. And why is that? Because I'm in cahoots with my ancestors. Why is that? Because all of that is coming from the celestial realms. It's coming from deeper bardos and deeper worlds, kings of heaven within you. So that very cryptic saying of Jesus, the kingdoms of heaven are within you, we unwrapped that in India, and Tibet continued on to do it up to this present day. So it found that it could actually trace the soul leaving the body into these worlds. And that it could also call the soul back from these worlds into the body again. This was an art that hadn't really been developed yet, and this is Tibetan's contribution to Indian Dharma. One of its main contributions, of course, that Mahamudra, which we will look at, is another. Well, don't worry, I'm not going to take you through 35 paths right now. This is actually a very good warm-up for these 5 essential facts. 5 eternal and essential facts of non-dual philosophy. So here's some facts. Call them rules if you want. You can see right off the top here. In the process of neutralizing karmas and samskaras, you all know that samskaras are by now, if the mind thinks about something for a long time, it runs a groove in the psychological stuff called the chitta, and it can't get out of that groove. Most handy example of that is the camel eating thorny bushes. Camel eating thorny bushes means that a camel has a desire for them. It eats them, its mouth bleeds, it gets pain, but it likes to taste. So it develops a taste for thorny bushes, and that's why there's so many camels born, because it comes back in its next lifetime to get that taste. And so that's a samskara that the camel has in its camel psyche. And but to speak of animals who are, we look out the window right there and see that cow's been eating grass all day, and we'll do the same tomorrow. So what are you doing as a human, all day, every day, for the rest of your life, to create a samskara in your mind that will follow you after you pass from the body and maybe bring you back here? Or, better spoken, what are you doing to erase those so that you will not have to come back here again? As Holy Mother said, birth and death are very painful. May you never experience them again. This is why I like her and why she is my chosen ideal, because she always said it the way it is. And she wasn't coddling you or trying to make you all right with the world, like some other teachers are trying to do. You want up and out of this world, there's no doubt about that. And most people, toward the middle end of their life, if you ask them, they'll say that. You want to come back? Oh, no, not really. Been there, done that. Do I want to, let's see, be born again? Do I want to grow up again? Do I want to have parents again? Do I want to go to school again? Definitely not. Not school, please. I know everything already. Why should I come back and limit myself to one subject that I knew last time? Oh, look for that thing in people. You see, in children, it says, oh, maybe they're a musician, maybe they have talent. Oh no, not music again, please. So you have to do the whole thing all over again. So this is to be considered, and freedom is also to be considered. What it would be like to come back here and be free of all that, because that's called bodhisattva in Tibetan traditions. See? And it's also called jivan mukta in the Vedantic traditions. They're free souls, so there's another option for you. Should you be so able. So, samskaras, I got sidetracked. In the process of neutralizing karma and samskaras, the recognition of the distinction between soul and the mind conglomerate occurs, cited as the difference between Purusha and Prakriti in Sankhya Yoga. So, Purusha and Prakriti. This key insight is not to be relegated to the perspective of duality, but to be taught in the light of Advaitic practice and realization. So this is one thing to keep aware of, this distinction between God and Mammon, Purusha and Prakriti, soul and nature, spirit and matter, however you want to call it. Maya matramidam dvaita advaita paramattaha. Anyone who tries to cause a distinction between those is not the true knower. See? They have to see them ultimately as one. But in order to know them as one, you're going to have to do this separation process. Wheat from the chaff, Jesus called it. Separate the wheat from the chaff. And so you'll see your own essence. After that, you can see that all of this has come out of you and that there's no God creating it. So this is where these 5 rules come in, facts. Number 1, non-dual truth could be put this way. The soul Atman is different from and ever free of nature. And some people in our day and time, in this particular country, want to say we're one with nature, only to the extent, the Advaita says, that it has come out of you, so it's your projection, not to the extent that it's separate from you, and therefore you have a relationship with it. It's dissolvable back into you. So let's go on back to the Tibetans. You're giving up air, you're giving up water, you're giving up fire, you're giving up earth at the time of death. And the Rinpoche is there telling you to do this and not to panic. See, well, I can't breathe very well. Don't panic, that'll pass. Because if you panic, you'll forget yourself, go unconscious, and your soul will just drift away, you see. You'll lose sight of your consciousness. So just hold on there, buddy, just hold on, you see. Wait, let those elements fall away, you'll see the light. Oh, you see the light? Go towards it. See, they'll guide the soul like that. So they know, because nature and soul are 2 different things. They're not one at all. They're only one if you realize that nature has come out of you. Then you can make that statement. Otherwise, you're transgressing all sorts of non-dual laws and stepping all sorts of philosophical toes, as far as India is concerned. 2, all of nature has come out of the soul. And as it does, no change takes place in the soul. So here's, again, a way of looking at the birthless, deathless, changeless Atman, you see, or Brahman. The non-dual reality, or Buddha nature, if you want to call it that. Tathagata, however you want to say it in your tradition, is that it's changeless. That is, no transformation takes place in it. So if you're seeing transformation and believing in it, you've been fooled. If you're seeing transformation, you're seeing Maya, not Brahman. So there's different ways in which they'll outline this for you so that you can see through change. When you're meditating and this eye opens, you see through change. You see through this world into a space of light. It's been had, 7 different traditions talk about it. Several different religions talk about it. Not just India. I found references to the third eye in 7 different religious traditions. So you penetrate through time and space when your consciousness becomes single. If thine eye be single, you shall know the truth, is how it was put in Jesus' time. So no change takes place no matter how it seems otherwise. So this is also good for the person passing from the body to know about. Oh, that change is all a dream. Oh, that change is non-actual. Those things that are happening to me are just phenomena. See? All based in impermanence. So I told you about, in the health food store yesterday, talking to that man who lost his house, you see, in the lava flow. And we were talking like this. I said, are you all right? Do you need any help? And so forth. We were talking. And he said, well, no, everything came back to me in the end. It was just all so beautiful what I ended up with. But there's a word I'm trying to think of for it all. And I said, impermanence? He said, that's it, impermanence. That's the word the Buddhists use about this world. It's all impermanent. Christ said it was shifting sands, and he warned you not to build your house on it. Not your philosophical house. Lord Buddha, 550 BC, said, oh, architect of Maya, I have seen you. I will not build houses on you anymore. I won't build houses of wood. I won't build houses of stone. I won't build houses of flesh and bone. Bodies. I won't produce them anymore. And I won't build bodies of wise conception. See, dream worlds in my mind. I won't build any more bodies now that I've seen that this is the nature of things. It's impermanent. I don't want to work with impermanence anymore. I want permanence with a capital P. The Parapurusha, See, the supreme soul that doesn't change, and which sees everything else, but nothing can see it, the Upanishads say. That's what I want. See, that's enlightenment. That's non-duality. That's Advaita Vedanta. So this thing about impermanence and change, very important to non-dual philosophy. These are, when I looked at non-dual philosophy, I didn't put this necessarily in any religious tradition. I drew from all of them, but this is the 5 things that I was most struck with that we could relate to as human beings and as Americans in this country in this millennia, if the sun is going to set in America after it rose in India. These things struck me. So the 3rd one is, as nature emerges from the soul, it does so as mental projection rather than as actual creation. So we're bantering about a lot of terms nowadays in English, and they've come down through lots of generations of text torturing in certain religions. I won't mention any names here. But creation is not a word that is favored in India. There's a God of creation, Lord Brahma. See, fine, you see, but he's got his part, and then there's a God of sustenance, and he's got his part, and then there's a God of dissolution, Shiva, and he's got his part. That's dissolving cycles. But beyond the cycle, there's this ultimate reality that is the witness of it all. Sakshibhutam, that oversees the whole thing, and that's you, with a capital Y. When you are in your fully realized state, you are all that, or thou art that. You can flesh out these sayings. There are words in which you can do it, and ways philosophically in which you can impress it upon your mind, rather than just reading a book and say, I believe that. You see. And you can also, all the underpinnings that go with it, you can also become aware of and say, ah, I see, ah, thanks for the connection, great, you see. And knock that house of cards down for all times. And be absolutely assured that you have done it. Have the conviction, courage of your convictions. I like that American saying. Have the courage of your convictions. But people are giving up all the time. So as mental projection rather than as actual creation. It's a projection, and projections aren't real. Just like pictures on a screen are not real. So know that your mind did it. Don't blame it on God or devil. Your mind projected it, and know that it can also dissolve it. So this is what you're doing actually in meditation, is dissolving things. You're not sitting there waiting for bliss or to have a vision of God. All visions are Maya. All forms are Maya. What are you waiting for? See? I mean, they even sing about it. In beautiful ways too. You know, try and impress it upon you. I can lay my hands on it here. Jata nahe hridaye nachate samadhiya dhyanam nate hridaye nabahir pradesha jayam nacheti hridaye nahi vastu kalo Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Yavatit, one of my favorite beings to contemplate. This is why I wrote that book, The 24 Teachers of Yavatit. It says, there is no separate space inside or out in your Atman. So how can there be a place to meditate or a meditator striving to go within? No form can be seen where no space exists. So who is it that you are trying so hard to see? Samadhi is just your true nature. Your pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Jnanamritam, samarasam. Samarasam is, rasam is this exquisite bliss. And sama is just non-dual peace, the peace that passes all understanding. So you are the nectar, jnanamritam, of wisdom, which is that exquisite enjoyment, you see, bliss. Gagano pamoham. You are that indivisible like the sky, you see, like the ether we were just talking about. And undisplaceable, impossible to separate out. That's your true nature. So they talk about this in various ways. They sing about it too. And there's a few other verses I'm already thinking of in here about mental projection. He says, these worlds that I see around me, they're not, they're no longer my concern. It's the horrible mind that has vomited them out, he says. It's the horrible mind that has vomited them out. So mental projection, see, everyone's into it, like a camel's into thorny bushes. So let's look at 4 and 5 and we can go for our break. 4 is the soul, Atman, has an eternal relationship with nature. You can see how they're beginning to qualify the non-dual approach now. It was pretty extreme before. Now they're bringing it down as a concession for people to understand it. The soul, Atman, has an eternal relationship with nature. If it identifies with nature, there is suffering. But if it only associates with nature, it can sport freely. So here's the rub and the solution all in one statement. Then this is where you get these souls in Tibetan Buddhism that are like bodhisattvas. They've been made so popular a word. Almost everyone in philosophical circles and spiritual life, they hear the word bodhisattva, they know what that means, because it got brought to us full force when Tibetan Buddhism came here, thanks to Mao Zedong, but we won't get into that. God works in strange ways. So bodhisattvas are free souls that come back to help others. And they're also souls that come back just to sport freely, and they help each other without even knowing it. See? So there are some people with a kind of a penchant, I'll come back and I'll save the suffering world and so forth. Others, I'm just going there to sport freely. But as they sport freely, they help others. So however way you look at it, these are great beings. In our tradition, Advaita Vedanta, Jivan Mukta, my teacher would say that like 6 or 7 times in every talk. You must become a Jivan Mukta. See, from his podium he would say that to the Americans sitting in front of him. Jivan Mukta. He really accented that. And the old men in the front row would jump and wake up when he said it. 5 here, nature has manifested and unmanifested sides. Okay? We don't know this. This is very important. We don't know about unmanifested nature, so we don't know the kingdoms of heaven. We don't know our dream states. We don't know that these 5 elements have come out of our own self. There's so many things we don't know because we don't know about unmanifested Prakriti. It's a huge rift, chasm in our consciousness. And so we think that the physical is all it is, and it came out of itself somehow, like a big bang. Sea or something. So we're left up a creek without a paddle to know the origins of things. All of Indian darshana in its search for God is about seeking origins. And there are many causes to many effects, and those effects are causes to something else, and it all marches back in where? Inside of you, inside of your mental projection. So many things you thought came about. And it took time. That made it worse, quite often. And it also caused karma. Lord Vashishta, we were talking about that yesterday. We were talking about Lord Vishishta says, beings come out of Brahman pure, without any cause. But by doing desire-based action, they create cause. So here's where you could do it without desire. So you could come just to be free and not covet anything, not own anything, not seek anything. Be like Ramana Maharshi or Sri Ramakrishna, just sitting happy like a child with nothing. That's a kind of emptiness, but it's definitely got a light behind it. Talk about radiance inside of emptiness. Those beings were superlative. So 5, nature has manifested and unmanifested sides by which knowing the soul can remain free of cycles of birth and death in ignorance. We'll read this final quote at the bottom to kind of get us warmed up and started in the second half. For now, let's take our break. Thank you for your kind attentions. We're back, and we are into the second half of our first class on non-duality in Tibetan Buddhism and Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. And good to make a distinction between Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, which is that thread that's running through everything. The gold in the necklace, the clay and the clay elephant, that one essential thing inside of everything that is where Advaita Vedanta likes to concentrate. Vedanta itself can contain a mixture of rich dualism and qualified non-dualism called Vishishtadvaita. And that's basically where the teachings come from, Vishishtadvaita. You can't really teach at a non-dual level very easily. So the Dharma and the teachings come at you at that qualified non-dual level, and then it's up to you to take those inside, and as you contemplate them, and you have certain insights, and maybe a series of insights, and pretty soon that house of cards comes falling down. You get some revelations or some genuine spiritual experiences, which are very rare, really. So Advaita Vedanta would be something to realize in that case, and everything leading up to it would be in a kind of stage, like everything else here. And we were just talking about that as far as Prakriti goes, also has these two stages of that rocket of major productions that it puts off, the manifested and the unmanifested. And as I was saying before we left the first half, that we in the West don't really know anything about tattvas and cause and effects which go back inside the mind. We're just thinking about it all in terms of physics and 5 elements, 5 senses. And so when anyone has spiritual questions or has spiritual aspirations or leanings, whether they be lay or monastic, it's very hard to find answers in this world. And I think pretty soon in a culture like this, it even starts to give rise to violence and selfishness and the kinds of things that you see happening to society and to our children and today. And we like to try and bring them close with the Dharma and teach them the virtues of nonviolence and non-covetousness, and things they probably already understand, but since they aren't getting represented for them or epitomized, exemplified, then they are giving up on it and resorting to other less savory means of action. So with that said, we want to catch up on where we left off, catch that tail of the tiger on that connection between matter and spirit, or God and mammon, or creature and creator, whichever you want to call it. So let me read that final. We've taken these 5 essential facts, and you've all written them down, and I hope you can memorize them and think about them daily, because they're put in such a way that is not so scriptural, and it's not so abstruse. It's just pretty much matter-of-fact statements about the non-dual reality, and then this conundrum that goes side by side with it, called Maya, or nature, or samsara, prakriti, they're pradhana, there are different words for it. It's if you're coming from the non-dual side, like Sri Ramakrishna was, he'd come down out of his samadhis and he'd look at this and go, "Mother, why have you brought me here?" He would actually talk to Divine Mother, the Shakti power that was moving him, and he couldn't even really understand what he was seeing anymore. It was so at odds with the non-dual reality that he was experiencing all the time. He'd have to touch water. Someone would have to give him some water, and you have to touch it. Oh, yes, the realm of the 5 elements. So when he came out of samadhi, he was coming down this spectrum of tattvas from non-dual reality. The simplest way we have to explain that is deep sleep, dream, and waking. The 3 worlds, or the AUM of Om. Any one of those ways of explaining it encapsulate it for us, and also at the same time defines our consciousness, 3 layers of consciousness that we have. And there's called Turiya. You know what Turiya means? The 4th. So Advaita Vedanta is very well known for Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, and Turiya. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep, Sushupti, and Turiya means the fourth. So there's this fourth state beyond these three states, which is that, with a capital T. And all the schools of Advaita Vedanta that are the most prominent, that is Shankara's school, Gaudapada's school, his famous Karaka on the Mandukya Upanishad, which is just 12 slokas long, all about the word Om and the states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep in just 12 slokas. All of that is evinced and described in very simple terms, but this is simple. Truth is simple. I give it to you, but it's also simply profound. It's not something that you can hear with these ears and all of a sudden understand it. It's the most enigmatic piece of information you'll ever receive from a Dharma teacher or from a realized soul. And you may get it, say maybe even in class. I understand that perfectly, and walk out the door and say, what was that again? That's how hard it is to hold on to that thread of non-dual reality, the Sutradhara, sometimes they call it. In Indian dance, you'll see it following the story of the dancer. In Indian music, you'll see it while the sitar plays, you'll hear it. It's always being referred to as this essential thread that's running through everything, that's hanging it all together. Krishna in the Gita talks about it as a string of pearls. Everyone loves the pearls, but the pearls would not be enjoyable, unenjoyed, if the thread broke and the pearls went all this way and that way, down the register. If you know what a register is in these days. So that non-dual thread is being described here in conjunction with or contrast with its offspring, basically Prakriti, nature. And this has given people, for time out of mind, problem after problem after problem with philosophies and religions. Religions, they pretty much turn their face away from it. But the philosophers have been at this nut, trying to crack it forever and having problems. So if you have the wherewithal, intellectually and philosophically, to tackle the non-dual stotrams and songs and scriptures, as I chanted that at the beginning of the class, Vedanta, Siddhanta, Niruktiresha, and at the end, Khandarupasthitireva moksha brahmadvitiye shrutayaha pramanam. Shrutaya, the non-dual scriptures, which must be heard, and pramanam, that prove to you that this is true. Shrutayaha pramanam. So this will prove that Brahman is the only thing in existence. So then what about this offshoot? What about all these 24 cosmic principles? What about the 5 elements and the 5 senses? What about all the objects? What about the confusion and the suffering that comes from the senses engaging with the objects? What about the karma that causes you to come back lifetime after lifetime without even knowing that you're doing it? So all of that is going to be tackled most efficiently and most swiftly by understanding non-duality in this lifetime. There are some pradayas. If we go back and look at some of these 35 paths I talked to you about, there are some paths that are not non-dually oriented, and they're more attracted to form, and they would rather see Jesus or see Krishna in some heaven than go to a non-dual position and dissolve themselves. The hailstone fell in the ocean, as Shankar said. You see, if the hailstone's heading toward the ocean, it sees it in itself. That's duality. I am a separate being, and there's my essence. And so it's like fearing, to dissolve itself in its own essence. But once it hits and dissolves, then there's no second thing to come back and describe that experience of bliss it had when it merged. So people used to approach Sri Ramakrishna and say that. They say that it's much better to taste sugar than to be sugar. They're talking philosophically about being that Brahman or actually being separate from it so you can taste it. They say it's better to be separate from it. And many of the pathways believe that. So we asked my teacher once that. He said, they say that because nobody knows the bliss of being sugar. So that's a non-dual retort. See, that's how to come back from it. And my conclusion to it all, because non-dual samadhi is, of course, an extremely rare thing. The lower samadhis of wisdom and teachings and so forth, that can be had fairly readily if you have this intellectual and philosophical wherewithal to search it out. But non-dual samadhi is extremely rare, even amongst the great apostles of the different illumined souls. Very few of them had non-dual samadhi in their life. So since that's the case, the kind of conclusion there to be drawn is that you should try and have that experience. Then come back and enjoy all the sweetness you want. Because if you don't have that experience and you're born again without that experience, then you're having this experiences again, God with form again and again. What's the point? See, if you don't know your essence, especially when those great souls themselves have had that experience. I and my Father are one. Tatvamasi. I am the fully awakened one. I'm quoting Sri Ramakrishna, Krishna, and Advaita, Vedanta and Buddhism. Lord Buddha there. So they themselves have had it. So it's probably the way Shankara put it is, you should practice having samadhi. He actually says that in his Vivekachudamani. So you should sit like he did, like Buddha did under the boat tree, and just say, I'm now going to have samadhi. Forget this practice of meditation. Didn't the Avadhut just tell you? There's no meditator. There's no place to go for meditation, inside or out. You're already that. So you should try putting on this position, this asana, this mental asana I like to call it. Very superb mental asana of non-dualism, and just say, I am one with my Father, I am that. And even if you try it on sort of in a blind faith type of way, it's going to be very good for you. And there are meditations to help you with it. The dissolving the mind stream meditation. I'll show you the Shine meditation in Tibetan Buddhism next week. The burning pillar meditation. There are ways in which you just take apart these 24 cosmic principles we talked about and just deny them. You dissolve them one by one. And you do this in the sitting meditation. It maybe probably take you 45 minutes to start it. But once you master it, it takes you about 1 minute. You just go through all the 5 senses, 5 elements. I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And this sets you up for a very high meditation. In the remaining 45 minutes of your meditation, you can entertain this non-dual reality that you are. Sort of like meet yourself, you see. Introduce yourself to yourself. Lower self, meet higher self. Ego, meet the great self. Oh, I don't think I want to do that, because I'll be a hailstone in an ocean, you see. So this final quote, which bridges this, is, when the mind recognizes the stark distinction between consciousness and matter, sentiency and insentiency, it perceives that all of nature, name, form, time, space, and causation, is its own self-projected Maya, and it attains what Patanjali, father of yoga, calls Kaivalya. Would you all like to say that word with me? Kaivalya. 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 Yeah, beautiful. Rolls right off the tongue. Basically what it means is isolation from nature. Not a popular concept today. But that's what all the seers have realized. When they went to that non-dual state, they said, I had to go through Kaivalya first. And guess what? Think back to the Tibetan man dying on his bed, having to separate himself from the 5 elements. Remember? You can't breathe well, give up air. You can't see well, give up sight. You can't, you're dizzy, give up space, ether, So this is basically what you're doing, is you're separating yourself from nature, because the 5 elements are the grossest form of nature, but they've all come out of you as your own self-projection. No God, no devil, nobody involved in it except little old you, which is actually really a great big you, the great self. So all the souls that have come here and heard the dualistic fundamentalists and so forth talk, they've said, what are you talking about? There's no God, there's no devil, there's just the great self, and thou art that. So this kind of Advaitic cut to the chase is what is being offered to you, but you need to contemplate it. I said we need to look at practicing non-duality. We can't just assume it. It's not working for us in the West. Where are the illumined souls in the West? Where is our first Jivan Mukta? So what we're looking at here is Swami Vivekananda was our patron saint. There's no one else that has come here and brought us this. There are great souls that have lived at the same time as he did, and so forth, and after and before, in recent history, but nobody's come here to do this for us and brought it so clearly to us. And basically what he concentrated on was Vedanta and yoga. And because he did his own little commentary on the Yoga Sutras to help usher us into that darshana. It's one of the 6 great darshanas of India is Patanjala, or yoga, also called Raja Yoga, also called Ashtanga Yoga, 8-limbed. And what are we doing? We're involving ourselves with Hatha Yoga, see, and that's all. And maybe a little breathing exercise. So we really need to step up and take in these teachings, Shruti. Shruti first to hear, Yukti next to reason about it, contemplate it, and then Anubhava, get your direct experience of it. And so there are meditations in which will help you do this. So he says here, all of this nature has come out of you, and it reminded me during the break of this beautiful sloka from the Avatud again. Kantara mandiramidam hikatam varami samsida samshayamidam hikatam varami evam nirantaram samam hir nirakulam vai gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So in this sloka, pertinent to this quote we're just taking up, he says, Brahman requires no proving, stymies all doubt. Forests, streams, mountains, temples are all incomparable to it. With a single eye, one will see it pervading everything, pure, unaffected, and ever stationary. And I am that pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So that refrain, Gyamamritam Samarasam Gagonopamoham, at the end of every one of these 40 verses. This is a Chalisa, Avaduta Gita. So 40 verses of that same refrain every time. Pretty soon he even puts it more personally. He would say something like, we are pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like the space. So he begins to include you into his wide view, as he usher you into this idea that you never were a sinner, that the worlds of name and form all came out of you, that this is your own mental projection, and you can just as easily turn it off and see your true nature. But practice is necessary. This is my point today. Practice is necessary for non-duality. And for those who have admittedly attained it, and from whom there's no doubt and so forth, of course, this doesn't apply. But we're not seeing it very much, evidence of it. And those souls who do attain it, they're unique, and they stand out. It's not hard to find them in this day and age. They were more readily available in ancient times. You say that when Ram lived, Sri Ram, that there were hundreds of forest yogis who had had the experience of non-duality, but only 12 of those knew that he was the avatar of the age. So there are some hidden secrets in Maya, see that veil knowledge even of the wise ones. But these non-dual beings are superlative then, and so this is a presentation of, you might say Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta are both contained in these kinds of statements that I left them without reference. I put them in my own words. Of course, my own words means they are the words of the seers. But I didn't put quotation marks around them and cite who said it because we had to put it in a readily available English. So in the remaining time here, let's take an actual Tibetan teaching and also look at it in terms side by side with an Advaita Vedanta teaching. Here's Gaudapada. That is, a Sparsha yoga means non-touch yoga. I don't know why this didn't become more prominent and more popular, the non-touch yoga, but whenever you hear anything like that, you can trace it back to Shankara's guru's guru, Gaudapada. A Sparsha yoga didn't get a lot of notoriety, even philosophically, and even on the subcontinent of India, but whenever you hear anything like that, it can't be touched, maybe even all the way down to a rap song, can't touch this. See, I like to think when I heard that song, oh, they're talking about Brahman on the radio. So, non-touchism, it also has a negative connotation. Don't touchism, Swamiji said, Vivekananda said, is what Indians have been practicing sometimes, is they won't touch the untouchable, and they won't eat with different castes. They're practicing a kind of non-touchism or don't touchism. That's not what we're referring to here. The Sparsha yoga is that you cannot touch that Brahman. Nothing, like the Avathuta is saying here, nothing that's of nature or of the senses can perceive that. Even John said that when Christ told him, later John said, no one has seen God with these eyes. So Christ managed to convince John that the Almighty Father, the Spirit, was transcendent of everything. Fishes, loaves, breads, nets, huts, wives, families, transcendent of everything was this Almighty Spirit. So later on John was meditating in a cave at the end of his life on the word Om, on the word that Christ told him about. And he also knew that no man had seen God with these eyes ever. So you cannot see that Brahman, or feel it, or touch it, or smell it, or hear it. And that's why we come down to this qualified non-dual level and sit here and listen to Dharma, because that is a flavor of it. It's the best flavor of non-dual reality, is to engender in you an ability to taste the power of those words that are coming out. And the scriptures, the revealed scriptures too, are remember, Shrutayaha Pramanam, they're the obvious truth of the fact, because these are the experiences of the seers. And these teachings of India haven't been text tortured. They've lived much longer than, say, a King James Bible has. They've gone back far before Jesus was. Jesus actually probably entertained them himself as teachings. And they've never been text tortured. They've always come to us pure, like here on the Big Island, lava tubes. They'll turn into or pahoihoi if they're left on the surface too long, exposed to the air. But if they form a tube, they'll flow all the way to the sea. So Dharma is like that. Indian Dharma formed a tube, a shell, and it flowed all the way to the sea of this present time, right here on earth, with Swami Vivekananda coming through that tunnel and giving us these teachings so that we could validate this truth of our being. So leaving the 5 eternal facts behind, essential facts, as a kind of summation of it all, let's take, in the remaining time, let's start with Tibetan Buddhism here, because I think it can, we have enough time to finish this chart. I want to show you the Mahamudra next week. Mahamudra is a very beautiful, if I bring it here, yeah, a very beautiful chart, painting by my friend Gary Dickens, who's passed now, but Mahamudra is a profoundly non-dual teaching of Tibet. On the other hand, you have to be able to climb that ladder to non-duality and qualify yourself for its full fruition in you. People do have glimpses of Brahman. They do see the light, even without dying, in hospital beds and in bike races. And all of a sudden they have these standstill experiences where it stands out to them, but they neither remember it nor can call it back later. The seers actually live in this. Sri Ramakrishna was the most remarkable soul because he could go into these samadhis and keep the body. Most beings, the scriptures say, go into these higher samadhis and the body floats out like a leaf in the wind. So they have that kind of experience. You don't keep the body. It's like a moth flying into a bonfire. No way you're going to come out of that. But Sri Ramakrishna was remarkable in the sense that he could go into these higher samadhis and come out and speak with you and go in again and come out. He would stay in them for hours at a time and still be able to retain his body. It's a stupendous feat, for spiritually speaking. So we have to qualify ourselves by levels. You have Mauna Kea out here in back of us. Thank God it's not flowing lava. The lava is coming from one of the other craters. But here next to us you have Mauna Kea, and if you climb it with a mule, then even the mules have to rest after a while. You get up to 10,000 feet, because this mountain is higher than Mount Everest if you measure it from the ocean floor. So you're really high up there by the time you get to 10,000 feet. Everyone has to rest overnight before they can do the next 11,000 and then 12,000 the next day. And they acclimatize their lungs to it. Even the mules, they say, have to do that. So this is a nice metaphor for the soul trying to acclimatize itself for non-dual samadhi. I mean, you have to think about it as the death of the ego. And the ego is everything you love. The ego is to you the truth right now. You think that is life. And my teacher used to say that's why dualism, fundamentalism and so forth, a lot of people take refuge in that. He said they think there's a God out there. But there's no God. That's just the ego they're worshipping. So he was a realized soul who saw that in the American people. They're just actually enjoying their egos. And but the ego is an onerous phantom. See, I'm quoting from the Avatud again. The ego is an onerous phantom, you see. So you have to acclimatize yourself to those so that you can stay there longer and longer, like Buddha did after he sat for 49 days under the Bo tree. He finally got to a place where he could establish himself in nirvana. And he began to shine with a light. Tejas, they call it. We don't have a name for that. Maybe aura or something, but Tejas is the name for that light that comes out of a realized soul who spent a long time in that kind of higher samadhi. And it's a light that shines off of everything. So off of a realized soul, and it's a transmitting power too. It'll affect you. Like if you're with Jesus, or you're with Krishna, or you're with any, like Buddha, the 12 apostles, the 16 direct disciples of Ramakrishna, the 8 noble 8 of Buddha. If you're near them, then you're getting this transmission off of them, off of their bodies, because the pores are actually exuding this light of enlightenment called Tejas. First it starts off as Ojas, spiritual orange juice. But then it turns into Tejas, and so you get a transmission. So you have to come near the fire for that and stay there. So in Tibetan Buddhism, this chart I put together from my own experiences in it and my practice of the Tara Mantra and the teachings I got from Karmapa and from Janggon Khantrul Rinpoche caused me to pull together this chart called Precepts, Points, Practice, and Process of the Vajrayana Path. The diamond vehicle, Vajrayana. Hinayana was early Buddhism, and that was pure Indian. Let's not mistake Buddha for a Japanese man or a Chinese man or a Tibetan man. He was Indian. Just like Christ was not a European. He was Middle Eastern. So early Buddhism, when the Arhats, some 500 of them lived after Lord Buddha had passed, and the religion almost passed out of into extinction because only monastics could be enlightened. So they had to try and make the enlightenment possible for householders. And so that gave way to the Mahayana, the great vehicle. Later on, Tibetan Buddhism comes along with the diamond vehicle. So Buddhism, and then finally Zen Buddhism in Japan. So it's a beautiful march, as I've described it, of Buddhism across the face of this earth. So I've subtitled this Empowerment, Effort, Insight, and Transcendence. So here's some points and precepts. Number one, Guru Yoga and Empowerment. Any of you have gone to Tibetan teachers since they were on the scene in the 70s and 80s, got some empowerment. And you probably did it with 500 or 1,000 people because people were really turning out to see some of these Tibetan teachers. So you might have gone to large groups in auditoriums and gotten these empowerments. And you'd walk away saying, I got an empowerment. But actually what they're waiting for you is to come up to the teacher and say, what's next? You can't just walk away with one empowerment and figure that that's it for you in Tibetan Buddhism. You have to go and apprentice the teacher. So that's Guru Yoga in Tibetanism. It's a two-part thing there. Seek and develop a relationship with the Guru. And qualify for empowerment and gain the wisdom transmission. That's that tejas I was just talking about. You get a transmission from these souls. So you say if you meditate, if you seek to develop a relationship with the Guru, India has a lot to say about that. Not only in scriptures, but musically too, as you probably will recognize when you hear this. Na gurur nadikam tattvam, na gurur adikam tapaha, tattva jnanat param nasti, tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. So that's the Guru Stotram in so many verses. Says here in that verse, my Lord and Master is the blessed Lord of the universe. My undying Guru is the supreme teacher of the universe. My essential being is ever one with God Almighty, and is therefore the self in all beings. Reverent salutations to the ultimate Guru. And salutations to the Guru, who is the inherent divinity in all, who creates the realms of being and becoming, but who is without beginning. There is no one beyond or outside of this all-encompassing Supreme Being, none higher. Salutations to the ultimate Guru. So the verses about the Guru roll on in this stotram. And eternal praises be to that consummate teacher is the chorus. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara means Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are that ultimate Guru. They reflect that ultimate Guru. But this stotram also puts it in terms of I am that. So making that connection, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, one day your mind will become its own Guru. When your mind becomes its own Guru, then at that point you can be free of delusion and depend upon only the Atman. So Guru Yoga in Tibetan Buddhism, you can see how it smacks of this kind of pure Indian Dharma. So, but to qualify yourself for empowerment and gain the transmission is required. So those are 2 points in number 1. And I put in here a teaching, 4 points concerning the process of this. First, meditate 3 times a day with faith and devotion. Second, Practice holding the mind in an unmodified state. Third, realize that whatever appears comes from one's own mind. And 4, meditate constantly until conceptualization disappears. All of it is so loaded. The comments I want to make about it, the 3 times a day, yeah, good luck with that, busy people. We won't comment on that right now. You can try once or twice, maybe morning and night. Practice holding the mind in an unmodified state. That's pretty common to all forms of meditation. They want you to stop thinking. My joke about that is that your parents always yelled at you for not thinking, you see. And then you started thinking, and then you went to your Zen teacher and you said, would you stop thinking? So you can't win, basically. So and it connects with number 4, non-conceptualization. If we refer back to this other chart we were looking at about the essential facts, that's sankalpa, conceptualization. Vitarka, Father of Yoga calls it savitarka and nirvitarka and so forth. These are forms of thought. They can get higher, and that's what you want. With a hot air balloon, the sandbags weigh it down, Sri Ramakrishna says. So it's always just contemplating on the sense objects. And it doesn't get much out of them. In fact, it gets disease and suffering as well as pleasure. But if you cut those sandbags off, then it'll start to rise naturally. So the mind has this buoyancy in it to want to rise, but you're going to have to cut off those sandbags of grosser things. And finally, conceptualization too will have to go. You can use it for a time, just like rationale and practical things, you can use them, but then pretty soon you're going to have to experiment with letting them go. That number 3 I saved to the end though. Realize that whatever appears comes from one's own mind. These are, I've been saying it probably way too much in my talks, but these are the mind-only schools of India, and Buddhism is one of those. Every school in India thinks that the same way. Everything came from your mind. It didn't come from God. We already said that. God doesn't create. If you say it came from the Creator God, that's different, because but then you have to say that's inside of you. Where else would the Creator God be? Have you seen Him up there? Has anyone seen God with these eyes? No. So the Creator God must be inside of me too. I must be in cahoots with Him, producing all of this. The horrible mind is spewing it forth all the time. Shame on it, you know. So we have to quit this conceptualization. You do so every night in deep sleep. You cut it all away. You yourself do that. Nobody else does that for you. Well, there might be a curtain of nescience that falls on you, but that's insentience. It's not some devil saying, I'm going to veil this from you, you see. You decided to abandon your own consciousness in deep sleep and not take it with you, that's all. And you got good rest and you woke up, but in the end result, you're doing that same thing for cycles for days and days. Remember that teaching on the sun god? His staff is the flood of days. The sun god gives you the flood of days. So how many days do we have? How can we count them? We've got stretching out in front of us, and way back we've had hundreds and thousands of days granted to us by the light of the sun. So that's at the very beginning of the Akshi Upanishad that we studied in Portland. You can look back on that class, it was recorded. So in that way then, the mind is continually engaging in this conceptualization. In deep sleep it loses it, and they say that effect disappears in deep sleep, but cause is still there because you come back out of deep sleep to go back to dream. So you're caught in a 3-world dilemma. Most people are caught in a 1-world dilemma until they find this out. They say they don't know anything about their psychological consciousness or being. They barely know their emotional self. That's causing them enough problems to handle, putting out fires and so forth. But a 1-world scenario is just waking, dreaming, eating, sleeping, going and doing all this forever and ever without knowing why or where, or the whys or the wherefores for anything. If you find out it's a 3-world process, AUM, And you can connect those letters, A, U, and M, together. You'll find out what the word is at the foundation of it all. And it's God's word. But it was only with God in the beginning. See? There was no beginning. Beginning is not true. So it's a tongue-in-cheek statement. In the beginning was the word. That means origins. Christianity got stuck on that. Christ did not mean that there was an origin to anything. He knew there was no origin. That's Gaudapada's main teaching. Non-origination. Everyone up to the present time, including Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta and all the people that we're reading nowadays, got this from Gaudapada. He's the father of non-origination. And that means there's no beginning, no middle, no end, number one. And number two, there's no transformation either. Anytime you see any of those things, you have to back off and say, that's Maya. That's not Brahman. That's impermanence. That's not permanence. That's change. That's not stability. And you take refuge in what's stable and what's permanent. And you get a habit of that. And then you will be meditating 3 times a day. And your meditations will feel stable. You'll actually start getting blessings from them. The blessings that you yourself granted yourself by doing this. So that third one I saved for the end because the mind-only schools are, along with unmanifested property, we don't know about them. We're not entertaining them. We're not thinking about them. We're not including them in our own consciousness. We're not accounting for them. If we just account for them with the mind, then they become true. That's the thing, the strange thing about the mind. It doesn't account for a thing, it might as well not exist. So if you don't account for God, God doesn't exist. I agree with you. But when you account for God, then it exists. Later on you'll find out that thou art that. You know, you might have gone through a few stages thinking, oh, there's a God in heaven, or there's a God inside of me, or there's a God helping me, and so forth, or there's a God causing the tornado that rips apart everything. You know, you might go through all sorts of misfiances thinking about God and angels and this and that, and superimposing form over it, till you find out that, oh, I see, I am that. I and my Father are one. And you come out of the woods and say, I'm the light of the worlds, when you had that realization. And it's not the stuff of religion, it's the stuff of spirituality. It's the stuff of Advaita Vedanta. Religion can't understand it, and never did. That's the funny thing about it, you see. But back to the mind-only schools, I'm harping on it, because here it is again in Tibetan Buddhism. Let's stop sloughing all of this on God and devil, and take responsibility for ourselves. For it, ourselves. As a collective consciousness. World first, 7-8 billion. Our ancestors after that. The celestials after that, and deeper inside, because they're all being chanted to in these slokas. And some of them turn into our gurus, and our students, and our children. So those 4 points come up concerning the process. That is, Guru Yoga and empowerment are important. Those are early things, you know, in Tibetan Buddhism. That's what you'll get when you first step into a Tibetan Buddhist empowerment or near a teacher, like say Dalai Lama and so forth. If you go on retreat, next you'll be encouraged to do the practice. Can't realize anything without the practice. Okay, point 2, Vajrayana practice, shamatha, or dwelling in peace. They have a nice, sorry here, there are technical difficulties. Or I'm talking so much it started to flag. Shamatha, or dwelling in peace, is a kind of meditation, and here it is in these 7 points. They want you to receive and observe the vows of the tantric vehicle. We'll get to that. Purify the nadis and centers for the flow of prana. Very yogic. I said earlier, I think, if they see you in a condition that's not very awakened. If they can cut to the chase, since they can't convince you of non-duality yet, you're not qualified for it, or you haven't gone through these practices yet, then they'll say, let's see if we can get you breathing. See? Now, you can't just sit and turn your lungs into a pair of bellows. That's not going to do anything. You can huff and puff as all you want, you'll never get enlightenment. Hundreds and thousands of breaths can go by, either unconsciously or consciously, and it won't make no never mind to your enlightenment state. Because enlightenment isn't something you get by practice. But if you don't do the practice, your mind cannot see reality. The mind has veils, so that's what you're trying to get at. So prana is one of the things that you aim at the mind. Right now it's aimed where? At the objects. Fully, 100%, totally at the objects. Doesn't matter whether it's your TV or the new carpet you got or your shrine. It's aimed at the object. And so you have to redirect it to the heart. And yoga says this, and Tibetan Buddhism concurs in its tantric yoga. It's pretty much tantric yoga. So purify the nadis and centers for the flow of prana. So you have to get more than food energy flowing through you. Because you exercise, you get food prana flowing through you, and you're healthy, and you stop. And then old age comes, and death, and you can't exercise anymore, and the nadis squash, you see. And everything gets congested. So first of all, you get the food prana. Man does not live by bread alone, though. So once you get the food prana moving, you have to take it deeper. And this is common to both Kundalini yoga practice with the nadis and the chakras and Tibetan Buddhism. So you can see the similarities. If you purify these nadis, and breathing exercise will help that, if you get more oxygen to the brain, you're actually opening up channels in the physical body. But if you get more teachings into your mind, you're opening up channels in your subtle body. It's a good way of thinking about it. You can open up channels in your physical body with breathing, but by taking teachings with a mind that has that good food energy, then you can get open up the channels in your subtle body. Hundreds and thousands of nadis in your mind. This is not your brain. Don't make that mistake. That's part of the body. It's in your mind where consciousness is. Consciousness is not in the body. God is not in the world. You cannot see God with these eyes, and so forth. We have to go back to the non-dual teachings and make sure we don't, compromise or make any unholy overlaps. We have to keep those laws sacrosanct and then do our practice and make this mind wake up. See, wake up to it. It's in the mind that'll wake up. The body will never wake up. It'll just go to sleep again. But the mind can wake up and stay awake. I saw that in my own guru. He used to say, "A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my dreams have been turned into radiant meditations." So his guru came to him and woke him up. Now the body can go to sleep, but his mind is just free, you see. It's exploring the kingdoms of heaven. Most people only dream. And if it's a good dream, that only happens once a week, see. Then a bunch of silly stuff happens in their other dreams. But here's a man who drops the body like he does in meditation and goes into this land with his third eye wide open and sees all the kingdoms of heaven inside of him and can go anywhere he wants and come back into the body. Why do you think they describe Sri Ramakrishna samadhis like that? So otherwise, there's a song in India, with eyes wide open and functioning perfectly, you still remain blind. With eyes wide open and functioning perfectly, you still remain blind. There's a song in India that has that line. So, purify the nadis, then the prana can flow along it. Breathing will help, posture will help, exercise will help, good food will help, But then you're going to have to get to what they call psychic prana. And Vivekananda said, along with those tattvas we talked about, in the other chart, the Samkhya Yoga Tantras, we don't know that, and we don't know psychic prana. We're not aware that there's an energy that courses through the mind that raises our thoughts and our aspirations. And you do that when you read a book and you get inspired. All of a sudden some nadis open in there, and some wisdom gets in, and your mind gets inspired. But then they close down again, you see, and after you put the book down or something. Now you have to keep them open all the time. Practice keeping the nadis open, inflated, see, like that hot air balloon, and not flag. You can rest, but don't ever think that the mind goes to sleep. Think it's ever awake state. Our teacher, our founder, Lex Hixon, called it yogic insomnia. He said, I have yogic insomnia, he told me one day. And you can have it too. Well, I could go on and on about that point, because that's really the early practice of yoga. But let's go on. See, worship Vajravahini, embodiment of all wisdom, and see all women as her. So here we have Tibetan Buddhism having this wonderful relationship with the Divine Mother. Now, I told you a little bit of my own path with Tibetan Buddhism, that when I went to Karmapa on Maui back in the 70s, he gave me the green Tara and the white Tara mantra, both in the same sitting. And Lex Hixon and I were there with him. He didn't speak any English. We sat down with this old illumined soul on Maui with peacocks walking around, and the sun out, and beautiful atmosphere. And Tibetan lamas were walking around. They'd come to Maui, and the Karmapa gave us these beads, made us recite the green and white Tara, and then we left. So that's Vajravahini. You get the Divine Mother transmission, and I got it both from Sri Ramakrishna's lineage, and then I got it from Tibetan Buddhism. So I hold joint citizenship in Mother Mantra, you see. And they want you to see all women as her after that, because Vivekananda has told us, without the regeneration of wisdom of women, India will never resurrect itself. Shakti power has to come forth again. So that's a very important factor, and coming from a subcontinent of India which has never treated its women that well. I mean, it's not like some places where women are treated worse, but never saw the potential in their women. But in ancient India, you had Gargi, you had Maitreyi, you had Lopamudra, you had these saintly, seer-like women who could outthink even the men in philosophical matters. And they're still prized in memory by the Hindus. And so Vivekananda said, we want to bring back more Gargis, we want to bring back more Lopamudras, we want to bring back these hoary women of the past, and that will give regeneration to our continent. So, see all women as her, so you want to see the Divine Mother and everything. It was really one of Sri Ramakrishna's prime teachings. He said, how do we look on women? As our mother, he said. D. Visualize and meditate on the Herukas, Dakinis, to penetrate the world. Well, I tried to give you a little preempt for that in the first half, is that these gods and goddesses, Devas and Devis, Herukas, Dakinis, whatever you want to call them in whatever language, are inside of you. And they stand as blocks in your way to higher consciousness. Each one of them rule over a different world, and if you visit that world and you don't know how to navigate it, then you stay in that world, like we are stuck here. Most people are stuck here in this world. They can't go into their dreams and visit the kingdoms of heaven. They're stuck in one world. When they dream, they don't even know that's another world, or that it's inside of them. They haven't put that together yet in this day and age. This is the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. Now you know why. So what has to happen then is you have to approach these deities inside of you with the mantra given by your teacher and say it, and they will stand aside, and you may pass. You see, so you propitiate them, you invoke them, but you have to find them first. If you think they're out in space or you don't know where they are, then you're at a loss. But if you know that they're your own powers and that you've lost them somewhere, then you can go find them again. It's really that simple. Yoga is all about regaining your lost power, but that's a loaded statement. What that really means is an immense attainment in the mind, subtly, in the subtle worlds. Immense attainment to be able to do that. And it'll radiate out into this world too. That's why you see people coming and benefiting this world, but they live inside themselves. They don't even really know much about this world when they come to it, you see. But because of their station, their position of realization in the inner worlds, they come here and bless it without even lifting a finger. Establish a relationship with one chosen deity, yidam, and merge in it. So, you ever dated gods and goddesses? That's kind of what they're saying here. You have to see all these powers inside of you and see that one that you love. You see, that ideal. It's called chosen ideal. In India it would be called Ishtam, or Ishvari, or Ishvara, depending on if it's male or female. And here it's called Yidam. So it's that chosen ideal that you see inside of yourself that inspires you the most, will give you the best amount of progress in the shortest amount of time. That's how Vivekananda put it. We want economy of time and maximize growth, maximum growth. That's how much little time we have, you see, kind of idea. So merge in it. So this is where you get to the Father through the Son. This is one of the better teachings of Christianity, is that you can take that ideal and you can merge. However, if you take the ideal and stop there, that's to the non-dualists is saying, why would we want to do that? Or, Vivekananda used to say, I would never want a savior to shed his blood for me. I'll do that for myself, thank you very much. Why would I want to put him to that trouble? If I find a person like that, I want him to be a doorway to heaven, not a doormat, but a doorway, see. So your ideal in these traditions is to meditate on it, find it, meditate on it, merge in it, so you get to absolute reality, non-duality through it. This is very tantric. There are some traditions where they don't use form in that way. They don't use form at all. They just sit and they practice neti-neti, or emptiness. They go for a state of abhava, no moods. They take out all conceptualization, and there's the light, I did it, okay, hopefully. Of course, that's a very steep path. For most people, that's impractical. So going through a chosen ideal is the better way. And so when you see these Rinpoches, these lamas, these swamis, these roshis, these people from different traditions coming from these different countries to America, the first thing they want to do is give you a mantra and connect you with an ideal. And they know that that's going to be the swiftest way for you to proceed in the state that you and your society are in today, right now. Because it's not just you you're dealing with your ancestors, their karma, you're dealing with politics, society, and education not being what it should be, no dharma being taught to you all your life, or to your parents. There are many things you're up against in this battle to realize your true self, to get enlightened. So it would be nice to think we could all just rise up above that and say, poof, it's all an illusion. But who's doing it? Where are they? I'd like to talk with them. Bring them to me. Or tell me where they are, I'll go to them. See? Our founder was like that. He had enough money, didn't have to work. Every time he heard of a holy man coming to like Sixon heard of a holy man coming to the United States, he was there on the plane, whatever city. And so he was just interested in the path to enlightenment and how people had gained it. And so he himself became, took on joint citizenship in 4 or 5 different religious traditions he practiced throughout his life, which was only some 55 years long. Our timing is running out, isn't it? So then let's finish this. That was an important point too. Visualize and meditate. Find your idam and merge in it. Then realize the voidness of both the deity and the world. That's an interesting word, voidness. You hear that a lot, sort of like that word impermanence or emptiness. So the voidness of everything means this emptiness in it all. It can be, number one, empty of the ability to fulfill you. You have to realize that. And then it's also empty of substance, but it's not empty of essence. That's how I would say it. It has no real substance because it's floating before you in a bunch of particles, and it's here and gone. It has no ability to fulfill you because you've been coming back lifetime after lifetime trying to satisfy yourself on it, and it's never worked. Here you are again doing the same thing. But it is full of essence, and that essence is your very self, your Atman, your Buddha nature, the Tathagata. And so in that way, realizing the voidness of both the deity and the world. You see how you're stepping off of those 3 worlds we were just talking about. Forms and concepts, right? You're realizing they're both empty, but they were necessary for you along the way. You shouldn't make the mistake of casting them aside too early. They were necessary for you along the way. The 24 tattvas told you what the world was like so that you could get rid of them. Air, earth, fire, water, ether, tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, seeing. You don't think those things are important when you're attached to objects? How can you do away with your desire for objects if you haven't transcended the senses? So those things are important at one stage. Then the next stage is going to be conceptualization. Basically what they're saying here, the deity. You're conceiving a deity. You're constructing God in your own head with your own consciousness. It's like making a salt doll and then dissolving it in the ocean. The ocean is the essential thing, but the salt doll was important for you to understand that this essence here is the same as that, you see. So it's the next step of higher conceptualization. And when Patanjali heard the Lord Buddha talking like that, he based his 8-limbed yoga, some of it, on that, his samadhis on that. We'll show you that 2 weeks from now. We'll look at how his samadhis line up right next to Buddha's samadhi, nirvana. So he based it on that, and it starts out with lower knowledge. You go to higher knowledge, and inner and outer, both forms inner and outer, and then finally you can get to bliss, and finally you can get to removing your ego, because the bliss is coming from your ego. It's not coming from Brahman. You're worshipping your ego. And then when you see the limitation of the ego, what did you say here? The voidness. See, your ego is also void, but it's got a higher bliss, and it's been jerking your chain. See, then you can give up the ego, and that's a very high station to attain. Guess what it's called? Kaivalya. Kaivalya. You see, you give up nature finally, because nature was the physical side of the thing that you were attached to, and it was your own nature that you were attached to, and you see how it all blends together real nice in a soup that's too salty, maybe for you. Wow. Got to get out of that hot water, you see, cool it down a bit. And then they say, gain realization of Trikaya, the 3 bodies. Quickly, the 3 bodies are the Dharmakaya, the body of the teachings, the Dharma body of the Buddha, and then Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, That is higher enjoyment, of course. Buddha fields, they call that. And near Manakaya, or emanation body, thence where you see the Buddha incarnations, these great souls, who are different than the gods and goddesses, by the way. The gods and goddesses aren't as profound and deep as these illumined souls. Those are your real guides to formlessness. You get to the Father through the Son. So we can look back on the three bodies. That'll be a good starting place for us next week here at the new Kedarnath, we're calling it. So we just moved from old Kedarnath a few block away. So here we should end with a chant and meet next week to take up more. We'll contrast also right away off the top of the class Gaudapada's Sparsha Yoga, non-touch, with what we learned here in the Tibetan Buddhist approach. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya Abira Mayedi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.